All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello, and welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, the talky and touchy-feely version of my book, PhotoWork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. Hello, everyone. I'm Sasha Wolf, recording from Woodstock, New York, joined as usual by the man who's never satisfied with my audio quality.
I'm not satisfied with anyone's audio quality, including my own.
The engineer extraordinaire. Very high standards. Impossible standards, Mr. Michael Chauvin Dalton. Well, I just sent you a photograph.
Yes.
I'm trying. I'm in a cocoon. I've used 6 clamps, 6 woodworking clamps. And I have 2 big drop cloths, 1 throw blanket, and 2 random pieces of rug pad. So you can't say I'm not trying.
Yes. Well, I moved into a new space too, and I've been tacking up sound absorbing tiles all over my wall. So my wall is more tile than wall now.
Yeah. I mean, I can't keep doing this. This is ridiculous. So I'm going to have to come up with
we're going to
better.
figure out something permanent. Yes.
Yes. But for now, when I was putting this all up earlier this morning, Peanut was I'm in my office, which I think I've mentioned is a separate building on my property. It's at my new place. I think it's about 10 by 12 feet. Anyway, there's a little 2-seater couch in here, and Peanut was in here with me. And by the time I finished making this cocoon, Peanut and I were completely separated, and she had no idea she was on the couch. How to get from the I trapped Peanut under very heavy drop cloths, but I rescued her.
Peanut is also sound absorbing, so good to have her around.
It's true. So how are you? I know you've had some COVID in the house.
Yes. My wife, Cynthia, tested positive. Yeah, I know. And, she honestly, she feels okay, just like a cold, but it just, the tests keep coming back positive. So just got to wait it out.
Yeah. Are you okay?
Yeah, I've been negative. So yeah, I'm okay. The kids are okay. Just, we don't quarantine like we used to.
Yeah.
Because, we're also heavily vaccinated. So
right. Yeah. Well, it is going around again. So everyone, if you don't realize that, be careful. I mean, obviously, we are, most of us, vaccinated, if not all of the people who listen to this podcast.
Right. Yes.
And
I think our audience is probably pro-vaccine.
Yes, I'm going to say that they are. But it is, I know a lot of people who have it again. And so, just take care of yourself, everyone.
Absolutely. Yep.
So getting to today's episode, I love this episode. I got to speak with Ahndraya Parlato, who I love, who's such a interesting, smart, creative, warm, funny, just really unique person. Her practice is really unique. The work she creates and the way she thinks about making work. And I just love talking to her. What did you think about the episode?
Yeah, so you really do an in-depth conversation on her book, Who is Changed and Who is Dead, published by Mack. And this is such a book filled with both a sense of sadness and tragedy, but also humor. And this is something that Ahndraya will, of course, talk about in the show, but this kind of way of processing the great tragedy that she has had in her life. And she uses multiple techniques, multiple media, beautifully written text, and you really do a deep dive into, how you think about a photo book, how you think about photography. Ahndraya talks about becoming a little bit bored with just looking at photos, and how she can get excited again about making photography.
Yes,
and I mean, you spend all this time on this book, but the conversation goes in so many different places. It really
does, because it's about life.
Yes, exactly.
Speaking of which, I don't think we've ever issued a trigger warning on this show.
Yeah.
But I do want to say that it's interesting because so much of the conversation this episode is delivered in a way that's almost lighthearted, but there's a moment where we discuss a violent incident and we do discuss loss, and the subject of suicide comes up, and we don't get in depth about it, but it's part of this story. And so I do want to just mention that for folks. It's obviously not for me or for Michael to determine, what each of you listening can handle. I don't think that this will be, again, it's hard for me to determine what you listening can handle, but I don't think this will be too difficult for folks.
Right. I don't think there's a level of detail that is too alarming. Yeah.
No. And it's a very, very, very almost fast and definitely small part of the conversation. But it is in there, and so I just want to mention that. Yeah.
And we talked about how you spend a good deal of time in this book. Ahndraya also introduces some new work that's coming, and that's actually pretty exciting towards the end of the show.
Absolutely. Yep.
So if this is Thursday, June 20th, when we release the show, and we know a lot of you listen as soon as the show is released, because we can see the numbers, there is still time to register for our sponsor's upcoming talk, Picture House, The Small Darkroom. We'll be hosting Yelena Yumchuk. She'll be talking about her new book, Milanka, published by Edition Patrick Frey. You can RSVP for that at their Instagram. At their Instagram. What the hell's that? You can RSVP for this event on their Instagram at PHTSDR and click on their link tree. And that should be that will be from 6 to 8 p.m. June 20th.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I just want to say that he's going to cut all that out, but I want to acknowledge that Michael just made about 5 bloopers in a row.
I know. I've only had a half a mug of coffee so far.
Michael was the blooper king this morning. Yay.
And you'll never know.
He only leaves mine in.
That's right. All right, I'll leave a couple in.
And thank you, Picture House, The Small Dark Room, as usual, for being our sponsor. We love you guys and so appreciate you. And I also want to just say, I saw the other day, I was on Apple Podcasts, that I don't think anyone's written a review for the podcast for a really long time. So if you listen to the podcast, we've asked you to donate, which some of you have done. But could you folks who have not written a review just have to write a line or two, just go into Chat GPT. They'll do it for you.
That's right.
You don't even have to expend many, brain cells, but we'd really appreciate it. So please, yes, rate, review the show if you haven't done that. I don't think that's asking too much. As you know, we work hard to get this out to you guys, and we'd appreciate that in return. So
absolutely.
Thank you. And
yes.
Why don't we get to it? Michael, if you don't mind, please take it away.
My pleasure. And here is your conversation with Ahndraya Parlato.
Ahndraya Parlato, welcome to the PhotoWork podcast. It's so great to finally have you on. I'm really excited. I've been really looking forward to speaking with you. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Sasha.
Yeah. Oh, it's wonderful. And I think I've had a bunch of dudes in a row. So this is nice.
I'd like to break up that male energy for you.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I have the great Sarah Kennel coming up soon, who's a wonderful curator. So, I'll tell folks more about her when she's actually on the show. But yeah, got some chicks, so that's good. So Well, you and I have known each other for a while, and I've been lucky enough to sleep in your guest room. Thank you very much. And play with the kids, who are not as little, I'm sure, but I'll see them again soon because I'm going to be up there with you and Greg.
I know, it's going to be so fun. This group of students that we have is actually amazing. I'm excited for you to meet them.
I'm excited to meet them. It's going to be really fun. So you're up in Rochester, but I'll let you tell our audience all about yourself and how you wound up in Rochester with that guy Greg that we're referring to.
Sure. Originally, I came to Rochester to take a teaching position at the Rochester Institute of Technology, where my husband, Gregory Halpern, was already teaching. I had been teaching in Ithaca prior to that at Ithaca College with Ron Jude and Nicholas Molnar. I had a great crew of people there.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to teach a little bit in the image text program at Cornell this summer, so I'll get to work with Nick again. I'm excited for that. He's amazing.
Fun.
Yeah, totally. But so about me, I guess I think the parts of my life that are relevant to my work are probably not those factual sound bites about work or whatnot, but probably kind of going back to my childhood, which I won't belabor anybody with, but the general kind of sketch of that is that I was raised by my mom, who is a single mom. I had no siblings, and my mom was mentally ill, and we didn't have a lot of money. So I had you used the phrase earlier, we're talking topsy-turvy. I'm going to use that because it's kind of cute and vanilla can mask a lot of harsher things. But I had a very topsy-turvy childhood. We were, generally we were evicted every year for a string of 8 years because my mom was so high maintenance with asking for locks to be changed and things in general. But luckily we did land in Burlington, Vermont, where I was kind of around middle school. And so I was able to stay there for a while. But as a little kid, I moved a lot. And I had a very intense relationship with my mom, who tended to treat me like an adult. So she didn't ever kind of talk down to me or talk to me like I was a small kid. And I kind of rose to that challenge, I guess, or part of my personality accepted it easily. So I make this joke, when we would be evicted, we would go apartment hunting, and my mom would read me the advert description for the apartment before we would get there. And literally for years, I was so flustered over the phrase wall-to-wall carpeting because as a child, I expected to see carpet on the walls, obviously. And I just never asked about it. At a certain point, I was kind of I guess there are just things I don't understand, and didn't go there. But
you just made coffee come out of my nose. Thank you very much.
Oh, good. That's a good start to an interview.
Thanks for that.
And so, we would look at these apartments together and kind of pick which one made sense or which one I liked the best too. I would weigh in on it. I guess I was well respected and had kind of a lot of control or equity maybe in our relationship. But also I kind of was had to mitigate my mom and the world and the kind of two different, I call them realities, to the two different realities I was being exposed to. I don't really know that any reality is objective, but we all agree to kind of call, to define, to self-define, to collectively define objective reality. And so there was the reality I was learning at school and in the world. And then there was living with my mom. And so my mom, from a very early age, she would one common thing was that she did believe that people always had keys to our house. And so anytime anything was awry, it was essentially someone had used their spare set of keys to come into our house and do this. And from a young age, I had to kind of grapple with these small things. So it could be something so seemingly trivial. She'd be I put a button here that I want to sew back onto my shirt and it's missing. I think the neighbors came and took it. And I would be 6 and I would have to work that out in my head. And I'd be that is a really dumb reason to come into someone's house. Could that be true? But then, as a kid, you're kind of poised to believe what your parents tell you. So I had this tension between what I was being told and what I thought and what I was being taught in the world. And I felt from a young age, I kind of had to sort it out for myself. What's the truth and what's the fiction of something? And I think that maybe is something that really has stayed with me through various shifting ways within my work.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So yeah.
Yeah, keep going, because I know that's not the end of your story.
Well, so I mean, I don't know. I was like from a young age, like I started making pictures like in middle school, which like, I mean, means nothing now. Like literally all my students are like, oh, we've been making pictures since we were 4. And I'm like, okay. But like, I was really interested in the fact that I could take things that were like in my head and make them visible to other people. And so like, even when I saw things in the world that I thought were photographable, I was not interested in them because I presumed that other people would also find them photographable. And I knew that I was really the only person who could take the things in my head and like give them visibility. And so I always like from a young age, I always was more interested in kind of constructing tableaus or shoots or setting things up with my friends. Generally people I was already intimate with. I was kind of shy about like asking strangers to do things. And so usually I worked with like close friends. And I did that, I started that in middle school and I eventually ended up going to Bard College for undergrad for photography. I went there for photography. Like I already knew that was what I wanted to do. And which is also, I was like kind of oddly, knew early on what exactly I was gonna, not exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I went to graduate school at California College of the Arts, also for photography, pretty shortly after finishing undergrad.
By the way, middle school is young to be.
Not anymore. Not if your parents have cell phones and they're like, go take pictures on this. Then it's like you're old. Like if I started making pictures when I'm 12, that's like old for kids these days. But they don't really realize that I was like shooting film and like whatever.
See, to me, it's a totally different thing. I'm sorry. I'm putting my foot down on this. I didn't start making pictures till I was in high school. And I can't give too much respect to like, shooting on your iPhone and thinking that that's like working your ass off, because when you're young and you have to develop film, I mean, that's just that not only is it a really precise craft, it takes real patience and dedication. It's hard as heck, especially when you're young and you're starting, right?
Yeah.
Like it's hard. You have to be really, really into it.
Yeah. So I was very lucky. I had
go through that.
I had a teacher in high school. I didn't have any photo classes at my high school, but I had this class. It was called Design and Illustration, and it was like a 2.5-hour class in the middle of my day. And actually, my friend's mom taught it, and she was amazing, Lori Erickson. And she was like the time when people were giving like a ton of money for kids to learn like Photoshop. Like it was like literally the beginning of Photoshop, and so we just had all this grant money, and my high school had an old darkroom from when it had a newspaper. And my teacher said, we have enough money that if you want to like resurrect this darkroom and you can like figure out the chemicals and like the equipment you need, I'll order it. And so I had to it's so old, I know. So I had to do the research, like figure out what a black and white darkroom needed to like be up and running and the chemicals and stuff. And she bought it all for me and we set it up. And so I could go and I could print for these like 2.5-hour blocks in the middle of my high school day. It was like pretty amazing. So I just kind of sorted myself out with like how to do that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. It was like
and
so
you
lucky.
Unearthed the page boy cap in the corner.
Totally,
I mean, it sounds like
totally
the newspaper from the 1940s.
Right.
So, well, that's seriously knowing what you want to do. I mean, I loved photography when I was, it's been a lifelong love. But for me, part of it was also just I hated school.
Oh.
And so I was always, looking for ways to not be in my actual academic classes, but be squirreled away somewhere else where no one could find me. Anyway, so all right, so you go to Bard and then you go to California College of the Arts, where you probably studied with some amazing people.
I studied with a lot of, I lucked out. I really studied with a lot of amazing people.
That was quite the faculty there. So tell us a little bit about some of the folks who you worked with.
Well, at CCA, I worked, so Larry Sultan was my advisor there. So I worked predominantly with him. And then I also worked with Jim Goldberg, Tammy Ray Carland, and Todd Heido.
I mean, wow. I mean, that's just amazing. I mean, that's just, God, I'm jealous. So you're out in California, and how do you wind up coming back east?
Oh, that's a funny story, I guess. So Greg, who was my husband, but we were not even dating, had taken a job. Actually, it was kind of a funny like little lineage. Hank Willis Thomas had gotten a job at Cornell that he then was unable to take. And he said like, oh, you should hire my friend, Greg Halpern. And so Greg took this job at Cornell. And then I was in California and I was adjuncting at California College of Arts and working for a commercial photographer. And Greg thought that his kind of time at Cornell was going to end. And so he was offered some classes at Ithaca College to fill in for Ron Jude, who was going on sabbatical. And he took that. But then at the last minute, Cornell was like, no, we'd like to keep you on board. So then he said to Ithaca College, wait, I have a friend who you should hire to fill in for Ron Jude. So it was a string of kind of friends subbing out of each other. And then Ithaca College called me to start that process. And I remember it was kind of an intense day. The same day that Ithaca College was like, yes, you should come take this sabbatical position to replace Ron Jude. Also, Larry Sultan had asked if I wanted to be his studio manager. Because our friend who had been Drew Donovan, who's also an amazing photographer, was leaving to go to graduate school. And so I had that like this day of, having to sort myself out. But ultimately I ended up picking the teaching. And that is how I got myself back cross country.
And married eventually.
And eventually married, yeah.
For those folks who don't know, Cornell and Ithaca are in the same place, Ithaca, New York. So you've been making work for a long time. I wanted to have you on today, to talk about all your work, but I've been spending a lot of time lately with your book from a few years ago, which I still think of as your new book, but I know it was a pandemic book, so it's
it's new enough, I guess.
Time is warped and different, but it's a book called Who Has Changed and Who Is Dead, and it's extraordinary. And so I really wanted to talk to you about it, and we will. But you've done a few books, and before we get into this latest one, let's just talk a little bit about the prior book, A Spectacle and Nothing Strange.
Sure.
If you could tell folks a little bit about that.
So going back to that, sketch I gave of my childhood, I really think of Spectacle as being my act of processing my childhood and creating a place for both of those kind of realities I had alluded to before. So I think that everybody, like my experience was really marked, where like my mom's reality was like clearly very much more subjective than most of the people I met in the world. But I think every human has the experience of having to mitigate the tensions of like what's in their head and what's in the world and what feels objective and what feels subjective. And so really I was thinking of that book as an exercise in that mitigation, an opportunity to kind of like oscillate back and forth between those multiple realities, if you could like go that far, just reveal that they exist, right? And that we all just kind of agree upon a certain construction so that we don't have utter chaos. And then also to kind of just look at the ways in which darkness and trauma and humor, dark humor, like all of these things are also kind of part of our living experience. I feel like people really tend to like showcase all of like the happy and good things that happen to them. But I always think about how like a full life really includes everything that's happened to us, and you can't really just piecemeal out the good things. And I wouldn't want to, like, I don't know that I would understand what my good things were if I also didn't know what my bad things were, or I don't even know that my good things would be the same without my bad things. And so
they wouldn't.
I was looking at that, and then was one thing that was really interesting to me about that work, just so people know, that book, literally the photos in that book span like a 17-year period. So the oldest picture in that book, I think I made as an undergrad at Bard College in like 2002. And the book came out in 2016. And I probably made a photo for it in like 2015. Okay, so that's like 13 years. And so it's a very long period of time. And one thing I think is interesting is that when I started that work, I was really thinking of it as like a research project. Like I was researching 19th century notions of hysteria and the ways in which like hysteria kind of essentially created an amazing structure for like patriarchy in this way that I don't know how much we should get into it, but Freud's original paper on like hysteria, essentially posited that like the young women who he had been studying were most likely sexually abused. And then their families were like, whoa, 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 this is like not what we paid you to discern. And he quickly shifted and wrote another paper that is the more popular paper that posits that basically hysteria is a result of like repressed desire. And so it was like a big switch. So I was looking at that. I was looking at like kind of different anthropological cultural rights. And I wasn't looking at myself at all. I wasn't like thinking as like a 22-year-old, like, oh, this is about me in any way. And what I think is interesting about that is because, and I don't think any teacher or like anyone did this to me. I just think it's like common. And I think it's like particularly common, like within not just structural patriarchy, but within like any powerful structure that keeps to maintain power, the idea that like your personal story isn't worth telling. And so it wasn't until I got to graduate school, my mom committed suicide in between my undergraduate and my graduate years. And when I got to graduate school, I realized like I had been looking at all of these things that basically had so much to do with myself, but I had never been calling it about myself. And why hadn't I been doing that? And it's kind of, it's like over time, it's so interesting, especially as a teacher and like watching students and watching young female students be so hesitant to define anything as like being too explicitly about themselves, as if this idea of yourself is just simply not good enough. It's not enough to make something out of. And so I think, that shame or that feeling that you're not good enough is essentially like a tactic of any dominant power structure to maintain status quo. So the idea that your trauma or your interiority or domesticity or sexuality, like all these things are not worth making art about or stories or, fiction writing about is really just, to me, I think of it as like a scare tactic almost for people to not be comfortable sharing because there's so much more power in sharing than not sharing. I just thought it was interesting with that work that it took me kind of so long to get to this point to realize that it was both about myself and not about myself. And I feel like it has helped me kind of contextualize for me now why a project couldn't be a research project that was totally personal or a personal project that was totally political. It's kind of like all these delineations just feel so arbitrary to me. And I feel like maybe analyzing my path along that making kind of sorted myself out in that way.
It sounds very profound.
So I don't know about that. I mean, I'm sure many people have had that thought, but
well, I mean, certainly profound for you. A huge shift in your way of being in the world and being someone who creates.
Yeah, definitely.
Things that they share with other people. Yeah,
I think that's true. I mean, I think most things that we agree on are constructions. And it's so interesting when you realize that they can all be unraveled, like it's not concrete. It's just been acknowledged as such. I don't know.
No, I understand. Well, let's talk about the newest book because it's really fascinating. And that book is right where I guess you've put us with what you just said.
Yeah.
The book is phenomenally personal. It's made up of a good amount of text, your writing, 98%, 99% of it is your writing.
Minus some 90s music lyrics, yeah.
Exactly. The text is very informal, beautifully written, very funny at times, really devastating at other times. It's really a key part of the book. And I want to talk about what that means to a photographic publication.
Yeah.
But I want to just be clear to everyone who is listening to this episode, please buy this book, Who Has Changed and Who Is Dead, and do not be at all put off by the fact that I'm saying there's a lot of text. The text is, I think I said this in like a Jess Dugan episode because her last book has a lot of text too. And just like yours, is very, very personal and is incredibly captivating. Praise be the captivating personal text. I'm sorry. I do appreciate and respect a good academic essay, but man, they can be hard to get through.
Sure.
And not so your writing in this book, which is just I'm sorry to say this, but it's, it's like it's page turner kind of quality, and once you really understand the rhythm of it, it really takes on, at least it did for me, that feeling, because you have a way of being quite funny in one instance and then dropping the hammer on the next page. And I wasn't planning on doing this yet, but I'm going to do it. First, let me just say there's text, there's obviously photographs, a lot of different styles, and we're going to talk about that, including these spectacularly beautiful photograms that were made using your mother's ashes, which is so moving and also heartbreaking to me. But I want to read one little thing you wrote on one page. Yeah. Your grandmother is also a character in this. Important. So this book is about your children, your mother, who, as you said, committed suicide, and your grandmother, who was murdered. Mm-hmm. So you say, I buy 6 caterpillars so your grandchildren can watch them turn into butterflies. The company guarantees at least 3 of them will make it to their final stage of life. They all die. I write and complain. The email in which they offer to send me new caterpillars opens with the line, living things can be unpredictable. So when I read that, I laughed out loud.
I'm so glad.
I love that. And then I turned the page, and on the immediate next page is this. They never found your mom's murder weapon. The detective asked me, now you're speaking to your mother. They never found your mom's murder weapon. The detective asked me if I recalled any heavy objects around the house. I said that Grandma had an old-fashioned iron, now used as a doorstop, and that I hadn't seen it since I came to the crime scene. But eventually it was found, and it wasn't the weapon. I pride myself on my independence. However, I often get scared at night alone in my house. I see this as a glaring flaw, but it's one that, since your mom was violently raped and murdered at 94 years old by the man who mowed her lawn, I haven't been able to totally conquer. So the page before, we have this hilarious little anecdote that ends with living things can be unpredictable, and speaking about the caterpillars. And on the next page, you drop the hammer, and we learn how your grandmother, who we already had learned had been killed, but we learn, you insert those details for the first time, and it's really devastating. This happens a few times in the book, or quite a few times, this back and forth between sort of disarming humor on this very intense topic of life and death, fragility, love, loss. But obvious question is, was that intentional? This sort of seesaw of the setting us up gently for something heavier that would come next, or is the humor there to mitigate the horror and the sense of upset that the reader and viewer might feel?
I think that both of those sentences are true. Mm-hmm. I think that kind of like the bait and switch is intentional as like a formal device. Mm-hmm. But I think in general, the humor is not just like there to mitigate the feelings of the audience, but also is genuinely like something I use to mitigate my own feelings.
Yeah, of course.
So for me, I was just kind of I was like being fidelitous to my own experience in that way. Like, I am someone who even in like very dark or hard moments will have a flash of wry or sarcastic humor. And like I even often will joke that kind of the right music and humor can essentially get you through anything in life. It's my belief. Yep. And so it's there to mitigate for the audience and also to replicate how I mitigated those things for myself while living them.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the huge array of styles that you employed in this book. So this is a photo book.
You might think otherwise at this point, but...
Well, it's both, but it's a little memoir and it's a photo book.
Yeah, I actually call it like an experimental memoir.
Yeah, I think I think that's how I felt reading it, and I really love that form. So I was all in. It's the perfect audience. But talk about the choice to use so many first of all, tell folks about these different visual styles and your choice to use so many.
Okay. The book includes still lifes that I made in my studio using kind of art historical references from paintings that would have been used to speak to things like death and birth. It includes things that have been made in the world, or found in the world, rather. I mean, intentionally found. So there's a whole series of Sicilian tombs, like from the Bronze Age, and pictures of the house that my mom committed suicide in. Then there's pictures of my children. There are these photographs.
And excuse me 1 second. I don't know if I can't remember, but did I say when I was talking about this book, when I was talking about it being about your mother's suicide and your grandmother's, God, I don't even remember if I said, and about your children, which is a hugely important part of this book. And if I didn't, it's because I got fixated on the loss part, which is typical of me in a way. But yes,
we're going to get along great then.
Yeah, well, we can compare some gruesome personal history. Anyway, continue, please.
All right, so pictures of my children, these photograms that I was making with my mother's ashes, and then there's actually, like, I called it a chapter of still lifes of ceramics. And then also some riffing off of the vernacular images that we call hidden mother images from the 19th century. So there is a cacophony of like visual strategies. And for me, that came about because I actually, when I was first making this work, I felt really bored by photography. I felt like I had at that point been teaching maybe for like 17 years. I had all of those images that I saw in my day-to-day life. And then just like every other human in the world, all of the images just as we navigate the world as humans and on social media and kind of just this constant stream. And I think I was feeling inundated with images. And I was particularly feeling inundated photographically by images that felt very like technically proficient and were made of things that had established kind of precedents within contemporary photography, but ultimately felt soulless to me.
Yep.
So I was just, I think that there is, just kind of had been such a rise in photographic interest, and it was easier to self-learn and easier to emulate. And I just felt like I was seeing just so much work that didn't do anything for me other than regurgitate in uninteresting ways other work that I already knew or had seen. And it made me feel like I had to grapple with my own desire to keep making images. First of all, like, well, who am I to add to this existing stream? Or how am I changing it to be worth adding to this stream? And like, also, how can I not be bored? Like, I don't want to be bored making images. And so one thing I did was I was interested in kind of how much mud I could fling or how many balls I could throw before like everything fell apart. And so I wanted to, I should say that some projects like my project are about things that are not answerable. So like I can't, so my book is about like parental anxiety and the ways in which like motherhood is like a gendered construct in society. And then all this kind of personal trauma. And I wanted to talk about the ways in which those things like intersect and relate to each other. But like, obviously, I'm not going to solve with an experimental memoir like the problematics of like structural patriarchy and my family trauma. So I also felt that like by using multiple visual strategies and text, I could start to speak to the complicated nature and the intersections of all of those things and begin asking the right questions, even more than implying that I was offering an answer. And so for me, it was a way to kind of rekindle my interest in image making, and also just kind of a way of very clearly letting my audience know that I was just as unsorted out maybe as they were.
Yeah, that's lovely. And, one thing you said in a interview you did with Christian Baddock, and I hope I'm saying that right, in Paper Journal, because he asks you about this and the different styles that you employ. And you said, I think of it as a juggling act. How many balls can be up in the air before they crash down? And if they do crash down, is there a moment beforehand when for one lovely second, things make slightly more sense than usual? And when I read that, I thought, I wonder if now that the book's been out for a few years, it's completed, when you go back and look at it, do you think that? What's your feeling of the sort of chaos of this book, which it's actually not chaotic? It's funny. I'm going to take that back as a description. I actually think you really achieve what you set out to, which is not answering these questions, but I actually think that there is a lovely second where things make slightly more sense than usual.
Good.
I think you do achieve that, but I'm really wondering if you feel that way.
I mean, I worked really hard to carve out those moments. Mm-hmm. So like, you know, in like, if you imagined like a crazy ass spider web, like I think that everything in that book is very interconnected. Like, I don't think they're like anything is like a non sequitur, you know, that's just kind of like there without rhyme or reason. And I think that it does kind of unfurl in a way where you start to see that rhyme and reason. Mm-hmm. You know, the photograms that you mentioned, like for me, I was looking at like, it was very important that I would have a way to include my mom in this project more than just throughout the text. And I knew that I didn't want to use family pictures, but how do you include someone who's dead? And so I started making these photograms that have her ashes and then my hand, like very dorky photo one, kind of your hand. But I was thinking of them as these kind of like slightly macabre family portraits. Like, how do you make a picture with someone who's not here? Mm-hmm. And so I think that they work as a family portrait, and the ways that some of the ceramic groupings I also think of as family portraits. And then the ceramics, which maybe seem like the most kind of non sequitur moment in the book, like for me, I was really thinking about, so just for people who don't know, the ceramics are all either vessels, so things that are meant to hold things, and they're all amateur. So they're really clunky. They're not beautiful, thin. They're like, you know, like imagine like a kid at summer camp made something for their mom. And then I bought them all from thrift stores. So presumably they were made for someone who maybe used them, maybe didn't, but then got rid of them. And I was thinking about it as like a metaphor for parenting in this way that we are used and are, you know, serve a very specific function, but eventually kind of that function shifts in the best case scenario. So I was using the vessels as this metaphor for like a womb and as something that would serve a function and get left behind. And then also the fact that they were clay, which comes from the ground and which we all go back to. I was kind of thinking about this kind of lifespan of an object, and then the object would go back to the ground like a human body would. So like, I think that maybe the reason that a lot is there, but it makes sense, is that like, I worked really hard to make sure that they really did. There was nothing kind of gratuitous, I guess. Like it really, really does interconnect, even if it just takes you a bit to unpack the ways in which it's doing that.
A lot of the images in the book, there is they run the risk of visual cliche, right? The flowers, the landscapes, the children. I don't think that that's where they are, but I think that that's a risk they run. How did you avoid that? And was that a source of anxiety at all?
So, I mean, we haven't really talked about like why did I include text? So to start right there, part of the reason that I wanted to include text was that I was pulling from these stories that I share, things that I wanted to make, you know, visual as well. And I was concerned. So there's like this picture of an orchid. It's like a triple exposure of this orchid. And then there's this story about how one of the last times I saw my mom we were in New York City and she bought me a blue orchid that had been dyed, artificially dyed blue. And I was just a little bitch about it. I was basically like, this isn't even real. Like, this has just been dyed, just so mean. And really, she just thought it was like fantastic and beautiful. Right. And I have thought about that time, like, why couldn't I just say thank you? Or like, why wasn't I? But really, like, a photo of an orchid is pretty. Right. And so I knew that without kind of dovetailing into that story of my own guilt, it would run the risk of being purely aestheticizable. And I didn't want that to happen. So text is one way that I feel like I actually mitigate the potential for the images to be overly aestheticized. In terms of the subject matter itself, I mean, I think that I did struggle, particularly with photographing my children as a mom and like having to cut out the images that would have been gratuitous in so much as like my children just looked like happy, beautiful children. I had to be really kind of firm with myself to ensure that the images of them were serving another purpose, right? And I think I did cut everything where it felt like that was happening. And I also wanted to, look at kind of ask the question, like, is there a time in which a female body can hold an unsexualizable position in society?
Yep.
And so I think that's not really probably a common reason that people take pictures of kids. I hopefully avoided it just by, cutting out what didn't make sense as content and should just be like in a family album or something.
To me, maybe part of the answer is it's everything together. It's the way, I mean, to me, this is the pro body of work argument, right? Like, this isn't about individual images. Could I pick individual images that I would want up on my wall? Without a doubt. There are many spectacular images in this book. I want to be clear. I think the images are very, very beautiful. I think what makes them not family album pictures is that they're very complex. Yeah. How we feel about them. I know from spending so much time with this book and going back to it over and over again, especially over the past couple of months where my life has been chaotic and had a number of ups and downs, my read on this book, both the text and the images, completely changes. And that's all credit and deep respect to your work here, that it's the complexity of the images that, offers so much to the viewer and allows us to have so many different experiences with it, which I really am grateful for, because to me that's really the ultimate success. I used to work a lot more with private clients than I do now. I work primarily with museums now in my role as an art dealer. But when I worked a lot with private clients, one of the things that I really loved was when it was people who were just starting out collecting, was steering them towards the more complex images, because, often a new collector will want to choose something that's
pops out a little to bit, them flashy.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it doesn't have multiple readings necessarily. They look at it, they connect with one thing, and that's it. And sort of trying to explain to them that, it's like if they were a Scotch drinker, that this is like an example I would use with them, or let's say a red wine connoisseur, that, they wouldn't want to drink a simple wine. They want to drink a complex wine, right? Like something that when they started drinking wine, they might have thought of as not particularly delicious because of all the complexity.
Right. But over
was
time,
the thing they wanted.
Yeah.
That's right. Right. So, to me, this book has so many different readings, and it's going to come down to the person interacting with its state of mind. And that's really a success to me.
It's so funny, Sasha, because as a teacher, I'm always like trying to convince students that the photos that they like the most, the quickest, are like not going to be their keepers. And, of course, they think I'm like full of shit. And I'm like, no, like the ones that you like right away, like it's like you like them and then you stop liking them. But it's like the ones that have like a slow burn, time tells that they're still revealing themselves to you, really.
Without a doubt, 100%. So, we touched on this a little bit, and I just want to end talking about this book before we talk about what you're working on now. But with the idea of, how do we feel as photo community people who love photography and love looking at photographs, how do we feel about a book that needs its text?
Oh, well, so yeah. I mean, so for me, it's interesting that you say that. I was coming from a place where I think many photographers probably come from, in so much as like the photo should speak for themselves, right? The photo shouldn't need any explanation. It should be doing the work. And for that reason, I actually spent the beginnings of this project like very sheepishly writing. I was like pretty nervous about like having quote unquote too much text. And at that time, it was particularly funny because like I didn't have I didn't have any outlet for it yet. So I was like, who am I worried about offending with this like egregious amount of text? Like I don't even know, but I was holding myself back. And then one day I was talking to my friend who I already mentioned, Nicholas Molnar. And he just casually just referred to the project as a hybridic project. And it was like one of those like stupid no duh moments where I was like, oh, like duh, like this actually just isn't a photo project anymore. It's a text image project. And I actually do think of text image as a separate medium.
Yep.
And so once I like realized that it wasn't a photo book, I felt totally, it was like I gave myself permission to lean into the writing element. And so I don't see it as a photo book with text. And when I show it, I make these lumen prints of the text. So they're like framed and on the wall with the pictures, and I make them and I fix some of them and I don't fix others. And so some of them are on the wall dying in real time or darkening, so you can't see them.
That's beautiful. Yeah, how moving.
And so it was important to me to solve them as an object if they were going to be like part of the work and not, you know what I mean? And so it was like I feel like that the hybridity of that, you have so many kind of additional considerations. Like I needed the book to be a size that would feel appropriate to being read, because it wasn't just a photo book anymore. I needed it to I needed my audience to feel comfortable sitting and reading it. And I didn't want to make huge images that would then kind of say like, actually, hey, this text isn't important. Just look at these big images, Like I wanted to show that the text was important. But then if I wanted the text to be part of the work, I had to solve it on the wall too. Like how do I put it on the wall if it's going to be part of this and make it into an object with materials? And so I do think that it has its own set of considerations, not being just a photo book with text, but really being kind of in its own, not its own, but, a different genre. And for me, that like the two, it was just important to me that they were each really kind of working on different registers. Like I love photos with text. I mean, obviously, but for me, what I dislike, and I think I just like kind of dislike this in general, is like I don't want to be told something twice. And so for me, it was really important that they were, and I don't want to feel like one thing is doing all the work for another thing. So I kind of, if I feel like the text and the images are telling me the same thing, I don't really care. And if I feel like I don't want to look at the images and I only want to read, or I don't want to read and I only want to look at the images, then it doesn't feel right to me either. So I kind of think of them as like that they need to do equal weight and that they need to do different things. And then I love them. But,
No, that's really awesome. And it's funny what you said about, it's like, I'm always amazed when I get stuck and then I come unstuck and it's so obvious. So it's like what you were just saying. And I always think of it, it's like, I'm just looking one way and it's as if my head can't move.
Totally.
And then you just turn your head a little bit and you see a different view and everything changes.
Totally. Or you just get so granular, like in with something. Like, I'll have a student working on something and I'll be like, should I be using a glass vase instead of a ceramic vase? And I'm like, well, there's a really great way to figure that out. It's like the stakes are so low. Like we're just talking, it's like people get all heady, like, well, this will shift it in this major way. I'm like, well, if you do the work, you'll know if it's working.
Right, exactly.
And we're all kind of do that in our own heads in various different ways and to ourselves of like kind of hold ourselves back.
Yep, for sure. Well, I love that you figured it out. It's like a sort of Maggie Nelson book with pictures, which is really wonderful. That's a high compliment because she's a great writer.
Yeah, agreed.
So tell us about what you're working on now. What's next?
Well, so, I mean, I'm kind of am thinking of it as a companion piece to this project. Although I'm not yet sorted out on whether it's like a companion piece in so much as like it's in dialogue because it's me or if it's like literally a companion piece. But I was, when I was working on this book that we just spoke about, one of the things I was thinking a lot about was how motherhood in Western culture becomes kind of this epithet that trumps like every other thing about women often. And so when you're a mom, you could be like severed from your hobbies, your career, your sexuality, like so many things. Motherhood is like the thing above that. And in some ways, that is like an erasing or closing down. It's a reduction. And so I was thinking about motherhood almost as like a form of invisibility where it disallows people to see other elements of you in one of its, negative, in one of the negative iterations. So then I kind of was just thinking more about that and thinking about, you can't really like read an interview with any middle-aged artist, writer without someone mentioning the word invisibility. And so I started thinking about how aging for women can often have an element of invisibility and the ways in which, like motherhood and fatherhood, like aging is gendered for men and women and markedly different. And the difference between, for instance, like, a man turning 40 and like culturally he's like being cued to the fact that like he's worked his whole life and here's his payoff, his spoils, and there's more good to come. And like a woman turning 40 and it's like, get ready for the end of your life, like the end is and just the difference, like the culture, like culturally, like that is such a different headspace, right? Like
Absolutely.
Reap your rewards versus like prepare for like irrelevancy. And so I was just thinking of aging. I was thinking maybe I could carve out a space where I could explore like a psychological space, obviously not a literal one, where I could explore both like my fears and my fantasies around this gendered aging. But I just in the way that I didn't want this last book to be didactic. I really trying to go about it in an expansive way. So like, what would be my worst case scenario and what would be my best case scenario, and playing out all of those scenarios. And so right now the project includes like a series of portraits of women between the ages of 55 and 75. And this is the first time in my life I've ever worked with people I don't know. So it's interesting for me. I kind of am also realizing that I like a little bit of a challenge. Like I had never written before that last book. And I was like, now I have to figure out how to do this thing. And so I feel like making these pictures of strangers has been another challenge for me, but it's also been just kind of an absolutely amazing experience so far working with them.
And how are you finding your subjects?
I'm actually just finding them on Craigslist. So I started kind of like how anyone would start. My friend offered me their mom, and she came to my studio, and she was all dressed up. And she was beautiful. She's 71. And I just felt so uncomfortable because I knew that the beauty that she wanted revealed was not the beauty that I wanted revealed. Even though we just said that my photos are beautiful. So there's like, no, I'm not like going Bruce Gilden on this or anything, but there's like, I could just tell that there was a tension there, right? Between how she, And so I needed something that would just have a little bit feel a little bit more equitable. So I have a post, and the post, leads people to many examples of my work. And I kind of feel like if they want to reach out, they kind of know what they're getting themselves into, in a more direct way. And I don't know them. they come in dribs and drabs. No one is pounding down my door, and half the time they're like men who are just ignoring the fact that I don't want to photograph men, which I'm like,
how shocking.
Yes, I know. Yeah. Someone just asked me to take a couple pictures for them. I was like, we're definitely using that euphemistically, but so it's like, it's Craigslist, so you get tons of random shit.
Right.
Anyway, so it's been a few years I've been making these pictures of women, and I have a few women that I love, and I've worked with them a few times. I've called them back. There's there's maybe some main characters and some tertiary characters, and then there are some still lifes. And then there is also another written component, and the written component has elements that are very similar to the book we just talked about. And then it has kind of a weirder component as well, where a woman is writing to someone she saw in the world that she believes to be a vampire. And so I'm using kind of the metaphor of like the vampire's literal invisibility and immortal life and lack of aging to kind of speak to this like clusterfuck of like anti-aging, immortality, projected expectations on women, and she kind of parses that out with them through these like epistolary forms. So it's a little weird.
Yeah, man, it sounds like I can't wait.
So and all you Anne Rice fans, no, I'm just kidding. It won't.
And just, are there any nudes, or are these?
That's a great question. So one thing is I've been kind of like trying to meet women at like the energetic level that I feel like they want to be met at. So I haven't like, and I was really torn on nudes in general. Obviously art historically, so many naked pictures of women, didn't know if I wanted to go there, but then also not really that many naked pictures of women in this age group. So then I was like, could it be interesting? I haven't really solved that like in a global way, but in terms of meeting people on their own. So one of my first women that I photographed, Harper, who I love, on our first date, if you will, she said, just so you know, I would love to be photographed nude, and I have a double mastectomy. And I was just like, this is, I don't even, I was like, this is a lot for me to take in. Basically, I didn't know if I wanted to, if I could go there at that moment with her without having thought it through and without having met her before. And we had our photo session, and then about a year later, I called her back and made some nude pictures of her.
Wow.
And that was, going off of her kind of initial offer. I wrote to her, I was honest. I said, I think I'm ready to, I think I would, you said this, and if that still feels true to you, I would love to actually do that now. Or if I'm like working with someone, I was working with someone and they were like, oh, so I've been like nude modeling for a drawing class. And I'm like, oh, I'll just be like, oh, I think they want to take their clothes off for me. But I'm never like, hey, what do you think about taking your clothes off for me?
Wow, that's really interesting. I love that you just sort of let it unfold. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can be like a little, I had one group, like two sisters who wanted to be photographed together, and they're the only twosome I have now. And I was getting all like, I secretly think that like all photographers are like have some form of control freak elements, that they're like masking or not masking. And I was like a little bit like, oh, I need to like have more twosomes. Like, this is weird. There's just like this one twosome. But then I realized like, well, no, like that's how they wanted to be. Like, I was like, I'm just going to kind of double down on just like energy matching and go with the fact that they came together and they wanted to be photographed together. And if that happens with someone else, that's awesome. But like, I'm not going to start like searching for like, more sisters or something. But my first response was like, this will stand out and be weird or whatever. And I kind of just, it feels more collaborative to not try to force.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. I mean, this is the ultimate sort of equitable collaboration, which is something that, we talk about a lot on the podcast, and photographers want to talk about a lot, particularly right now.
Yeah, sure.
Making sure that the photographer there's not an imbalance of power, or trying to mitigate that inherent imbalance of power. And it sounds like that's really, if anything, it almost sounds like you've handed over as much power as you possibly can while still being able to maintain your position as the person who's pressing the button on the camera to make the picture.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting conversation. I struggle with this conversation because in general in life, I feel like there actually aren't any relationships that don't have some kind of power dynamic. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's actually problematic to expect photography to like be the one realm of the world that's like, oh, hey, it's all totally equitable. Like, I don't think that's possible anywhere. And we like let it happen in so many other places. And in fact, not just like let it, but cultivate it and expect it to. So I think it's interesting that there's, so much has come down on photography for that. But I mean, not implying that there shouldn't be an awareness and that there are more and less predatory styles of photography for sure. But I do think it's interesting. I do believe that all human relationships have some kind of power dynamic. And so has been interesting for me to kind of have that in my mind's eye and think about photography and think about my images that I'm making. And I send them all like the whole take of everything I've made. They can just see it like I don't. And so if someone was ever like, I hate this picture or something, I of course wouldn't want to publish it moving forward. But I also I think what the thing for me that makes it feel like the best is actually like our exchanges. And it's funny, I haven't sorted it out yet, but I think a lot of it has to do with just, you hear me talking now and you read my text and you can kind of tell like, I'm not generally like keep cards close to my chest. I'm like pretty direct and pretty forthcoming. And so when I'm meeting these women, I'm also that way. And I kind of orient them to my work and tell them what I'm interested in. And none of them are like history people and it's amazing. First of all, they all get it. When I'm like, talk about it being gendered, like motherhood and aging, they're all just like, fuck yeah. They're like, no one is like, what do you mean by that? Like, we don't. So we're having these conversations about that. And then when I'm talking about my prior book that we just talked about, I do think after I'm like saying these things that are, vulnerable, I come home and I'm like, literally know like every detail of someone's sex life. I know everything bad that happened to them. I mean, it's just like, I couldn't make more than one person's picture in a day. Like they're very emotionally intense generally. And I feel like it's like, I don't know what I'm totally looking for. And I feel like we're mutually searching. Like we both don't totally know what we want. And that's lovely. Like the best case scenario. And there are times where it has felt energetically off or it hasn't worked. Because I always ask people like, hey, what made you reply to my ad? And the 2 times the energy has just felt really kind of off to me. Both of the women were just like money. Which is a totally fair reason to totally fair.
Of course.
No problems there. But it's interesting to me that it's like a lot more often I get kind of like, well, my kids are out of the house. I'm looking for new things. I don't really know. I thought about this. And those always are really kind of just feel open and good. And then it was, anyway, it's been really kind of interesting and I don't know, confusing and amazing. And we'll see.
Well, I can't wait to see the pictures. Maybe I'll get a sneak peek when I'm up in Rochester in August.
Yeah, definitely. We could definitely arrange that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. I love talking with you. And it's just been so much fun. And thank you also for this beautiful book that I just treasure, and everyone should get a copy. It was published by Mack, so you can go to the Mack website and get this book, Who Has Changed and Who Is Dead. It's really moving. So thank you. And say hey to Greg for me.
I will.
Tell him he's going
up next.
to be he's up next in the family, and we can get to the kids. But
I would be amazing.
And I will see you in a couple months.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sasha.
Okay, Ahndraya. Talk soon. Be well.
Bye. You too.
Bye.
PhotoWork with Sasha Wolf is a production of the PhotoWork Foundation. Executive producer is Sasha Wolf, and the associate producer is Taylor Selsback. The show is also produced and edited by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. Music is by J. Walter Hawks. If you like the show and wish to find out more about the Foundation, please visit photowork.foundation and be sure to subscribe and review with all the stars on your listening platform.